The air in the auction barn hung thick and heavy, a soupy mix of dust, sweat, and the sharp metallic tang of fear. It was a place of endings and grim new beginnings, where life was measured in pounds and priced by the pound. On the block, under the flat, unforgiving glare of a single bare bulb, stood the reason for the day's only ripple of cruel laughter. He was a calf so small, so utterly insignificant, that he seemed more like a caricature of a bull than the real thing. His ribs were a sad accordion under a coat of dull, patchy brown fur. His head drooped, and his knobby knees trembled, not with the cold of the autumn morning, but with a weakness that seemed to come from the very marrow of his bones. The auctioneer, a man whose face was a road map of cynical bargains, didn't even bother with his usual booming sales pitch. He just jabbed a thumb towards the creature. "All right, folks, what am I bid for this little mistake?" he drawled, a smirk playing on his lips. The crowd, a collection of hardened farmers and ranchers, in stained denim and worn leather, chuckled. A few shook their heads in pity, but most just looked away, dismissing the calf as a lost cause, a waste of hay and time. He was a runt, a throwaway. In a world of bulk and brawn, he was a whisper. But from the shadowed back of the stands, a boy was watching. His name was Leo, and he had seen none of the weakness. He had only seen the calf's eyes. In their dark, liquid depths, he saw not defeat, but a flicker, a tiny banked ember of a question. It was the same question Leo felt burning in his own chest every single day. Isn't there more to me than what they see? The laughter in the barn died down, replaced by an impatient silence. The auctioneer was ready to move on. No takers? Not even for a 5-spot. Last call, then. He's bound for the rendering truck. The words hung in the air, cold and final. It was in that moment, when the calf's fate was sealed by indifference, that a small voice cut through the heavy quiet. $10. The voice was thin but clear, and it came from Leo. Every head turned. The farmers squinted into the shadows, their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Leo stepped forward into the light, his slight frame looking even smaller in the vast, dusty space. In his outstretched hand, he held a single, crumpled, $10 bill. It was creased and soft from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times, the sum total of 2 summers spent weeding neighbors' gardens and collecting stray bottles. It was everything he had. The auctioneer stared at the boy, then at the bill, and then back at the pathetic calf on the block. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. $10? From the boy in the back? Sold. He slammed his gavel down with a theatrical crack, not out of finality, but out of sheer amusement. The transaction was a joke to him, a brief, humorous interlude in a day of serious business. A few men clapped him on the back, laughing. "You got a real champion there, son," one of them snorted. Leo didn't hear them. He walked past the smirking faces, his own face a mask of solemn purpose. He handed the bill to the auctioneer, his hand not trembling in the slightest. Then he walked to the gate of the pen, unlatched it, and stepped inside. The tiny calf flinched, expecting a blow or a rough shove. Instead, Leo knelt down, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't reach out to touch him, not yet. He just stayed there, on the calf's level, until the trembling in the animal's legs subsided just a fraction. He whispered, "It's okay. I got you." Leading him out of the barn was a slow, painful procession. The calf stumbled on the gravel path, his little legs threatening to buckle with every step. Leo walked beside him, a steadying presence, his small hand resting gently on the creature's bony back. He decided on a name then and there, a name born not of irony, but of pure, unadulterated hope, a prayer whispered into the wind. He would call him Goliath. The first 48 hours were a quiet, desperate battle, waged in the corner of a drafty, forgotten barn. The hope that had burned so brightly in the auction house flickered dangerously in the face of a stark, cold reality. Goliath was far sicker than Leo had realized. He wouldn't eat. He refused the warm milk Leo offered in a bucket, turning his head away with a shuddering weakness that terrified the boy. A fever had taken hold, leaving the calf's body trembling under a thin blanket, Leo had taken from his own bed. The world outside the barn faded away. School, chores, the distant shouts of other children playing, none of it mattered. Leo's entire universe shrank to the 10 by 10 foot space of the stall. His focus narrowed to the faint rise and fall of Goliath's flank. He spent his last few coins on a bag of expensive milk replacer and a feeding bottle from the town's feed store, the old man behind the counter giving him a look of profound pity. That first night, as a cold autumn wind rattled the loose planks of the barn, Leo refused to leave his side. He sat on a bale of hay, the bottle of warm milk clutched in his hands, and he talked. He told Goliath about the stars, about the feel of summer sun on your skin, about his dream of one day having a farm so green and lush it looked like a painting. He spoke in a low, steady murmur, his voice a thread of warmth in the chilling dark. When his own body grew heavy with sleep, he didn't go back to the house. He slid off the hay bale and curled up in the clean straw beside the little bull, pulling the edge of the horse blanket over them both. He could feel the feverish heat radiating from Goliath's body, could feel the tremor that ran through him with every shallow breath. He pressed his forehead against the calf's neck and whispered a promise, not to a god or the stars, but directly to him. "You just have to fight," he breathed, his own voice thick with unshed tears. "You fight, and I'll do the rest. I promise." For hours he lay there, a small guardian against the encroaching darkness. One boy's stubborn will pitted against the vast indifference of nature. Sometime in the deep, silent hours just before dawn, something shifted. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling. A subtle change in the rhythm of the breathing beside him. Leo opened his eyes. Goliath had lifted his head, just an inch, and was looking at him. The fever glaze was gone from his eyes, replaced by a clear, focused awareness. Leo sat up slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. He picked up the bottle of milk, still faintly warm. Without a word, he offered it again. This time, Goliath didn't turn away. He hesitated, his small black nose twitching as he sniffed the rubber nipple. Then, with a fragile, searching movement, he latched on. A soft, rhythmic sucking sound filled the silence of the barn. It was the most beautiful sound Leo had ever heard. It was the sound of a promise being kept. It was the sound of a turning tide. From that moment, a bond was forged, not in steel, but in milk and straw and whispered words. Their days fell into a gentle, healing rhythm. Each morning, Leo would mix the milk, his movements practiced and sure. Goliath would drink greedily now, his tail twitching with vigor. Afterwards, Leo would take a soft brush and groom him, working through the matted fur until it began to show a hint of a healthy sheen. He'd read chapters from an old adventure book aloud, his voice rising and falling with the drama of the story. Goliath listening with his head cocked, as if he understood every word. They began to take short, wobbly walks in the small, sun-drenched pasture behind the barn. An old farmer named Silas, whose land bordered their own, would often stop his work to watch them from across the fence line. At first, he'd just shake his head, a gruff disapproval on his weathered face. But one afternoon, Leo found a small, burlap sack hanging from a fence post. Inside was a scoop of high-protein calf starter feed, far better than anything Leo could afford. There was no note. There didn't need to be. The quiet offering was a language all its own, a grudging acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, there was something more to this boy and his tiny bull than met the eye. The seasons turned, painting the landscape in new colors, but Goliath's growth was a slow, stubborn thing. He was healthy now, his coat a rich, solid brown, and his eyes bright with intelligence, but he remained stubbornly small. He was compact and muscular, but next to the calves of his age on neighboring farms, he looked like a miniature. The initial quiet support from Silas had not spread. For the other kids in the area, Leo and his undersized bull were a source of endless amusement. They would ride their bikes past his fence and shout taunts. "Hey Leo, when's your dwarf cow gonna grow up? My dad's calf is twice his size already." Their words were like sharp little stones, and each one found its mark. For the first time since that night in the barn, a seed of doubt began to sprout in Leo's heart. He'd look at Goliath, at his short, sturdy legs and his compact frame, and a wave of anxiety would wash over him. Had he been a fool? Had he poured all his love, all his hope, and every penny he had into a lost cause? Was Goliath destined to be nothing more than a curiosity, a testament to a boy's naive dream? The doubt festered, a cold spot in the warmth of their bond. One afternoon, lost in these troubled thoughts, as he mended a section of fence, he didn't notice Goliath wandering near a thicket of blackberry bushes at the edge of the woods. A sudden, panicked bellow shattered the quiet. Leo's head snapped up. Goliath was caught. A thorny vine, as thick as a man's thumb, was twisted tightly around his back leg. The more he struggled, the deeper the thorns dug into his flesh, and blood began to well up, dark against his brown coat. Panic seized Leo. He dropped his tools and sprinted across the pasture. He saw the wild terror in Goliath's eyes and felt his own despair rising. But as he reached the thrashing animal, something inside him shifted. The doubt, the fear, the sting of other people's words, it all burned away, replaced by a fierce, singular focus. "Easy, boy, easy," he soothed, his voice low and calm despite the adrenaline pounding in his ears. He carefully took hold of the vine, ignoring the thorns that tore at his own hands, and began to patiently, painstakingly, untangle the mess. It was slow, agonizing work, but he never wavered. And Goliath, sensing the change in the boy, stopped struggling. He stood impossibly still, trusting Leo completely, even as the boy's efforts must have caused him more pain. When the last of the vine was free, Goliath limped back toward the barn, leaning against Leo for support. As Leo cleaned the wound, his hands stained with Goliath's blood, and his own, he knew. He knew he would never doubt him, or himself, again. Their size didn't matter. Their shared heart was all that counted. Have you ever had a moment where the world suddenly revealed a truth you were blind to? A single second that reorients your entire understanding of someone, or something, you thought you knew? For Leo, that moment arrived on a hot, hazy Tuesday in late summer. He was tossing hay into the feeder when a flash of movement at the far end of the pasture caught his eye. A pair of stray dogs, lean and hungry-looking, had slipped through a gap in the fence. They weren't massive, but they moved with the quick, predatory confidence of a pack. They had cornered one of the chickens that had wandered from the coop, and their intentions were clear. Leo's blood ran cold. He was too far away. He grabbed a pitchfork, his hands clumsy with fear, and started to run, shouting uselessly at the dogs. He knew he wouldn't make it in time. He braced himself for the inevitable flutter of feathers and the brutal finality of the kill, but it never came, because between him and the dogs, another force was moving: Goliath. He had been dozing in the shade of the old oak tree, but now he was on his feet, fully awake. He wasn't the small, gentle creature Leo groomed and read to. In an instant, he had transformed. His body, usually relaxed, was coiled like a steel spring. He lowered his head, and a sound rumbled up from his chest, a deep, guttural warning that seemed to shake the very ground. He took 2 powerful steps forward, and then he charged. It wasn't a long run, maybe 20 yards, but it was a display of explosive power that defied his size. He didn't run like a calf. He ran like a locomotive, a solid, unstoppable mass of muscle and will. The dogs, caught completely by surprise, scattered in terror, yelping as they scrambled back through the fence and disappeared into the woods. The chickens squawked and ran back towards the coop, unharmed. Goliath stood his ground for a moment, his head held high, watching the woods where the dogs had vanished. Then, the tension drained from his body. He turned, saw Leo standing there with the pitchfork, and trotted over to him, nudging the boy's hand with his head, as if asking for a scratch behind the ears. Leo stood frozen, the pitchfork hanging limply in his grip. He stared at Goliath, truly seeing him for the first time. He had seen his gentleness, his trust, his quiet affection. But this was something else entirely. This was a warrior's spirit. It was a raw, primal strength that had been hidden deep within that compact frame, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. The taunts of the other kids about his dwarf cow echoed in his mind, but now they sounded absurd, hollow. They had only seen the package. They had never even guessed at what was inside. That single act of protective fury changed everything. It was as if Goliath's charge had cleared a path not just in the pasture, but in Leo's mind. The boy no longer saw his friend's size as a limitation, but as a unique asset. Goliath wasn't small. He was concentrated. He wasn't short. He was grounded. With this new perspective, their routine evolved. The gentle walks became purposeful training sessions. Leo rigged up a simple harness from old leather straps and rope, and they started with small weights, a couple of cinder blocks, an old tire. At first, Goliath was confused, but he trusted Leo implicitly. When the boy asked him to pull, he pulled, and he pulled with that same shocking explosive power he had shown against the dogs. Over the next 2 years, the boy and the bull grew together. Leo shot up, his frame lanky but strong from the endless farm work. Goliath didn't grow much taller, but his body broadened and thickened until he was a solid block of muscle, his hide gleaming like polished mahogany. His neck was a column of pure power, and his legs, though short, were like pistons. The seasons cycled, a visual montage of their shared dedication. They worked through the crisp, golden light of autumn, the biting cold of winter snows, the muddy renewal of spring, and the long, hot days of summer. Silas, the old farmer next door, was no longer a silent observer. He'd lean on the fence, offering quiet, practical advice. "It's not about the first step, son," he said one day, watching Goliath strain against a heavy log. "It's about the second, and the one after that. He's got the heart for it. You just gotta teach his muscles to keep up with his heart." He showed Leo how to improve the harness for better weight distribution, and taught him about nutrition that would build muscle without unnecessary bulk. The mockery from others faded away, replaced by a grudging curiosity. The sight of the boy and his bull, working in perfect unison, a silent language of command and response passing between them, became a familiar part of the local landscape. Leo was no longer just raising a pet he'd saved. He was forging a champion. He was nurturing a force of nature, polishing a diamond that everyone else had mistaken for a common stone. One day, a colorful flyer appeared on the bulletin board at the feed store. It announced the annual Tri-County Fair, and with it, the Junior Stockman's Challenge. It was a competition for young farmers and their bulls, with events testing, showmanship, breeding, and the one that made Leo's heart skip a beat: raw strength. The grand prize was $5,000. To Leo, it felt like all the money in the world. It was enough to fix the leaking roof on their small house, to buy his mother a new stove, to finally give them a cushion against the constant worry that was their shadow. The decision was made before he even took the flyer down. But as the day of the fair approached, the old anxieties began to creep back in. When they arrived, the fairgrounds were a chaotic swirl of noise, color, and overwhelming scale. The livestock pavilion was filled with titans. Enormous, prize-winning bulls, the product of generations of careful breeding and expensive feed, stood in pristine stalls. Their owners were men and boys from wealthy farming families, the kind who had laughed at Leo in the auction barn all those years ago. They paraded their animals with an air of casual confidence, their bulls decorated with ribbons from a dozen other victories. And then there was Goliath. Standing in his small, designated pen, he looked like he belonged to a different species. He was out of place, an anomaly. The other competitors walked by, casting dismissive glances, some even chuckling softly. "Look at that thing," one boy muttered to his father, loud enough for Leo to hear. "They letting ponies in the bull competition this year?" Leo felt a hot flush of anger and embarrassment. He bent down, pretending to adjust Goliath's harness, hiding his face. He felt the familiar nudge of Goliath's head against his shoulder, a silent, comforting question. Leo looked into his friend's calm, intelligent eyes, and his own resolve hardened. Let them laugh. They didn't know. They couldn't possibly know what was coiled inside this small, unassuming body. They saw a mistake. He saw a miracle. The tension was a physical thing, a knot in Leo's stomach. But as he stood with his bull, ready to face the world that had once dismissed them both, he felt not fear, but a quiet, electric anticipation. The first event was showmanship. Leo led Goliath into the dusty arena, his back straight, his chin held high. He moved with a practiced grace, guiding Goliath through the required patterns. The bull responded to his slightest touch, his quietest command, their connection a visible, tangible thing. The judges noted their flawless synchronicity, but they couldn't ignore the obvious. They made notes on their clipboards, their pens scratching disapproval. Lacks scale. One judge announced to his scribe, "Confirmation is unconventional." They were awarded points for their partnership, but lost far more for Goliath's size. They ended the round near the bottom of the scoreboard. The small crowd of spectators offered a smattering of polite, pitying applause. The final event, the one that truly mattered, was the sled pull. A massive, weighted sled sat at one end of the arena. Each bull would be harnessed to it and tasked with pulling it as far as they could in 60 seconds. It was a pure test of power. One by one, the giant bulls took their turn. They were magnificent, roaring and straining, their hooves digging great furrows in the dirt as they dragged the sled across the arena. The best of them, a behemoth named Titan, managed to pull it 57 feet, a new fair record. The crowd roared its approval. Finally, the announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. "And our final contestant, from the Miller farm, Leo and Goliath." A few snickers rippled through the stands. The task looked impossible. The sled seemed to weigh more than Goliath himself. As Leo hooked him into the heavy harness, he leaned in close, pressing his cheek against Goliath's. He didn't shout words of encouragement. He just whispered two words, the same two words he had spoken on that first desperate night in the barn. "I got you." The starting bell rang out, sharp and jarring. For a full 3 seconds, nothing happened. Goliath stood perfectly still, his body gathered, his eyes focused on the empty track ahead. The crowd grew restless. "Come on, little fella," someone yelled, a tone of mocking encouragement in his voice. And then it began. Goliath leaned forward, not with a sudden jerk, but with a deep, titanic gathering of force. Every muscle in his compact body went rigid. The leather of the harness groaned. The ground beneath his hooves seemed to compress. And the sled, the impossible sled, moved. It slid forward an inch, then a foot. Then, with a power that seemed to erupt from the very core of the earth, he began to walk. His short, powerful legs pumped like pistons. He wasn't just pulling, he was driving, a low, rumbling growl in his chest. The sled didn't just move, it glided. He passed the 10-foot mark, then 20, then 30. The snickers in the crowd had died, replaced by a stunned, breathless silence. 40 feet, 50. He passed the mark left by the mighty Titan. The silence broke. A single gasp, then another, then a rising wave of sound as 1,000 people realized they were witnessing the impossible. He crossed 60 feet, then 65, just as the final bell rang. The arena erupted. The sound was deafening, a roar of disbelief and thunderous applause that washed over Leo in a dizzying wave. He rushed to Goliath's side, unhooking the heavy harness. The bull was breathing hard, his sides heaving, but he stood steady, his head held high. He leaned into Leo's embrace, the champion warrior becoming, once again, just a boy's best friend. The judges, their faces masks of astonishment, conferred briefly before the head judge walked over, his clipboard forgotten at his side. He looked from the boy to the bull and simply shook his head. "In 25 years of judging," he said, his voice full of awe, "I have never seen anything like that. Ever." Later, as Leo stood on the makeshift stage accepting the oversized check in the blue ribbon, he saw a familiar figure pushing through the crowd. It was the auctioneer, the man who had sold him a little mistake for $10. His face no longer held any trace of a smirk. It was filled with a humble, profound respect. "Son," the auctioneer said, extending a hand, "I was wrong. We were all wrong." Leo shook his hand, but his eyes were on Goliath, who was calmly receiving pats and scratches from a crowd of new admirers. The money was life-changing. The ribbon was a beautiful thing, but the real victory, the true prize, was not in his hands. It was standing right there beside him, a living, breathing testament to a truth the world too often forgets. That evening, back in their own quiet pasture, the setting sun painted the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The fair, the crowds, the noise, it all felt a world away. There was no trophy on display, no ribbon hanging on the wall. There was only the peaceful silence, the smell of sweet hay, and the gentle weight of Goliath's head resting on Leo's shoulder. The small bull who had no chance, the poor boy who had nothing but hope, were home. Greatness, they knew, was never measured in size or in dollars. It's measured in the quiet, unbreakable strength of a heart that refuses to be told what it can and cannot do. It's measured in a love that sees a giant, even when all the world sees is a runt.